Bevan was a Jamaican, Muriel a Quebecer. He was a country boy, she a city slicker. He came from a well-to-do family, attended a prestigious private school in Jamaica, and then immigrated to Canada to complete his post-secondary education. She was born into a working-class family and went straight into the workforce as a secretary after high school. The list goes on and on. I have always marveled at the way my parents, despite their differences, were drawn to each other. They've told me their connection that night was instantaneous. It's especially mystifying given that their identities so closely mirrored the larger social and political divisions in Quebec at the time. Francophone Quebecers viewed their language, culture, and ultimately their identity as distinct and under threat from anyone who was considered other. Anglophones, religious minorities, immigrants, and the global community at large. Bevan immigrated to Montreal in 1969 to attend Sir George Williams University, which became Concordia University in 1974. It was a time of enormous political and social upheaval. Quebec was still in the midst of its quiet revolution, or révolution tranquille, which saw, among other things, the secularization of society away from the grip of the Catholic Church and the emergence of what would become the sovereignty movement. The previous year, journalist Pierre Vallière, a leader in the Front de Libération du Québec, FLQ, had published his incendiary manifesto, Nègres Blancs d'Amérique, known in English as White N-Words of America, which, comparing their plight to that of enslaved blacks in the American South, called for French Canadians to take up arms against their English oppressors. Violence was in the air. In Montreal, the FLQ had begun a series of bombings against Anglophone targets that would culminate in the 1970 October crisis, which saw the kidnapping of James Cross, a British diplomat, and the murder of Quebec cabinet minister Pierre Laporte. Inspired by the civil rights movement south of the border, the city was also becoming a magnet for Black activism. The year my father began attending courses at Sir George Williams, a sit-in at its downtown campus to protest the racist treatment of Black students turned into the largest student riot in Canadian history after police broke down the activists' barricades. Montreal was very different from the sleepy country town of Myersville, St. Elizabeth, Jamaica, where my father was born and raised, and where his family still lived on their sprawling farm, chock full of centennial mango trees taller than Montreal's gray-stone townhomes. The struggle for Quebec's independence had become a battle of identity politics. White Francophones wanted to assert their claim as a distinct sovereign nation, while the rest of the population, Anglophones and immigrants especially, aimed to maintain their way of life within a united Canada. Just months before Bevan and Muriel met, those tensions had reached a boiling point. The separatist movement, led by the governing Parti Quebecois, had gained significant traction in the province. A referendum on whether Quebec should separate from the rest of Canada was on the horizon. My parents' identities may have reflected the linguistic, cultural, and socio-political divisions in Quebec society, but their love, at least for the time being, made such banal, worldly considerations seem trivial. For my mother, the relationship also offered a balm for her personal trauma. In 1971, when she was only 15 years old, her own mother had died while lying in my mother's lap as they rushed to the hospital. Kind-hearted Mariette suffered from severe depression, and her death was later deemed a suicide by poisoning. The shock of that loss and the powerlessness my mother felt witnessing that death in such close proximity never left her. It profoundly affected her sense of belonging, adequacy, and need for support. She felt, in a word, abandoned. Mariette had been the one to make breakfast, to ask Muriel about her day, to say goodnight before she went to sleep. After her death, nothing was the same. When Muriel met my father, she was still living in the same house in the Francophone neighborhood of